What's up, everybody? Thanks for listening to the Whatcast. Mike, there's only one way to start this episode, and it's like this. Bro, what's up with Vince McMahon?
Oh my God. Of all the ways to start the show, I was not expecting that.
I bet you
Good
never
God.
thought we'd talk about Vince McMahon tonight.
Oh, that dirty, dirty old man. My
Oh.
God.
Yowza, dude.
They should not have brought him back when they let him go the first time after that first group of allegations sprung up. And now they're like, yeah, come back, Vince McMahon, because we've got this deal with the UFC and it makes a lot more sense and for you to come back now. And he's like, I will come back because I'm stupid Vince McMahon with a goddamn ridiculous mustache now for some reason.
Did he come back with that mustache?
Yeah. When he didn't come back to TV though. But when he came back to the business, he had that ridiculous mustache, and that's when you know when you come back with that mustache after that sort of thing, you know you're going full supervillain at that point. Like, holy fuck! Like I'm waiting for people to start coming out about how they helped him hide dead bodies and shit like that.
Right, yeah.
Like, fuck that guy.
Yeah.
But we're not here to talk about Vince McMahon. As much as I appreciate the Shawn Michaels music, that was excellent.
So he had previous allegations?
Oh, dude, for like so long, so many people have had allegations against him, but he stepped down, I think it was 2 years ago maybe, because someone was saying that, No, he stepped down because he was paying hush money to some girl he was having an affair with, and he was using the company's money to pay her.
Oh, wow.
Rather than his own money. Yeah.
Yikes. Poor Linda. What would she say?
Well, they've been separated for like well over a decade.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they just never got officially divorced, but they haven't been together for a very long time.
Damn. All I needed was a separation to get to the poopscapades, huh?
So fucking gross, man. So fucking gross.
There's at least one listener that's like, hey, don't knock it till you try it.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess people would say the same thing about shark sex, but we've been doing that for quite some time now, so I guess don't call the kettle black.
Yeah, we're not shaming your poop kink if you have one. That's okay, but it's just funny coming from like an 80-year-old.
No, I kind of am shaming your poop kink, actually. I think you should take a good long look at yourself and say, what is my deal? Am I a piece of shit? Is that why I just, do a lot of self-reflection, and I hope you come out on the other side a better person as a result of it.
You know what's going to happen when they look in the mirror?
They're going to shit themselves and then pop a boner. Oh, God. I know I'm sexy.
I'm sorry, did you say they're going to shit themselves and then pop a boner?
I did, yeah.
Oh, God, that's awful.
What a way to start this show. Holy guys, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. We went off the rails way too early. It's going to be one of those shows.
Oh, no. I got the most terrible visuals with that. Like,
well, yeah. I mean, what other type of visuals would you have? Like, it's not supposed to be an enticing visual. Unless it is, I guess. You sick fucks.
For me, it went like a sympathetic route. The poor person's going to pop a boner with every shit they take, and it was just like at a not convenient time, and they're like, no.
Who needs lube when you've got human fecal matter,
Yeah, it's the McMahon method.
I saw Mr. McMahon do it.
Now young wrestling fans all around the world are going to start using poop for lube.
You're welcome, America.
Fuck, they're going to brand it. They're going to come out with poop lube.
Vince McMahon brand lube.
All right. What the hell are we talking about tonight, Mike, other than poop lube? Jesus.
I don't know. Can we just do an episode on poop lube?
Yeah, I think we can razz on poop lube and the WWE for the rest of the night.
Oh, God. Well, as promised last episode, we got more underwater shenanigans ahead. And for those that really like the underwater shenanigans, go check out Patreon later this month. I guess this will be coming out in February. Check out Patreon later this month. We're going to have an episode on when Italy declared war on the Loch Ness Monster. So keep an eye out over there for that. But tonight, we're talking about other underwater madness. And this one, maybe it's kind of in line with last week's episode, but instead of being a strange amorphous blob, now we've got man-eating sea monsters. So, we're keeping it carnivorous in the ocean. Big spooky carnivorous monsters.
Dude, I was watching some clip on the internet today about this certain type of boat that they use in rivers. I doubt they can use it in the ocean, but it has this big appendage that goes to the bottom of rivers and then pressurizes it, evacuating all the water. And then you climb down and you're just standing at the bottom of this lake.
Like you're Moses?
Yeah.
You're just parting the fucking sea, and then when you leave, you're like, all right, sea, go back to the way you should be, and it's whoosh.
Yeah, dude, they need to take that shit to Loch Ness.
Yes, let's get to the bottom of this shit.
Yeah, dude.
I want to know.
We need bones and shit. That's where they're going to be.
Yeah. Watch them do it, and like they uncover the cave that Nessie was in, and while it was a peaceful beast, once they disturbed it, it ripped them all to shreds.
Yeah, destroyed the boat.
Yes, that'd be awesome. Let's find Nessie.
But this is not Nessie we're talking about,
No.
right?
No, not to my knowledge. Unless Nessie likes to vacation off the coast of Florida, I would say this is not Nessie.
Ooh, Florida. I'm interested
Yes.
already.
Only the best things happen in Florida.
Agreed.
The absolute best. Cream of the crop. Just when you think Florida, you think the best of the best. And boy, do we have the best of the best here. We have a murderous fucking sea serpent, guys. Maybe. Potentially.
I was surprised to browse through this story. They kind of mentioned this being like a major case in the study of cryptozoology, but I've honestly never heard of this.
Yeah, it's one that I had mentioned on the show, and in typical me fashion, I had none of the details and just a general remembrance of the story. I was able to, I actually just by chance, I recently came across it again. And so this time I wrote it down and took notes about it so that I could actually talk about it. Because the way that I was remembering it was that it was these guys that were going fishing off the coast of New England somewhere. But that's not the case at all. It was off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. But it's an older case, but there are actual newspaper articles about the event that took place, but omitting any mention of a sea monster attack. But there is evidence to back up that something actually happened. It's not just some guy being like, me and my friends got attacked by a monster, and nobody heard anything about, well, who are your friends? Why wasn't it on the news? It was. But this happened March 24th, 1962. Like I said, this was in Pensacola, Florida, but I want to start it off by saying, despite the fact that it's in Pensacola, Florida, it's March 24th, doesn't mean it was a hot day or that the ocean was all nice. And in fact, that day it was in the mid 50s. I think there's actual record of it that you can look up in an almanac that'll show what the weather condition was that day. But on this day, 5 boys decided to make a day trip out to the wreck of the USS Massachusetts, which was partially submerged in 30 feet of water, about 2 miles off the coast of Pensacola. Their intention was to go to the wreck and go skin diving, which is basically like In this case, I don't know exactly what it was because the term skin diving is used interchangeably with snorkeling as well. But sometimes the equipment is different. So I don't know. The way he described it is he was skin diving, but he says that they had masks and snorkels and fins to go down there. But the 5 boys were Edward Brian McCleary, who at that point in time went by just Brian. He was 16 years old. There was Bradford Rice, who went by Brad. He was 14 years old. There was Warren Felly, who was 16, Eric Rule, who was 16, and Larry Bill, who was 17. So all 5 boys set out on this trip, but unfortunately, only one of them would be returning back from the adventure.
Dun, dun, dun.
And when he comes back, he's going to have an unbelievable and terrifying tale to tell. So this was going to be Brian McCleary's first time diving at a sunken ship. He had moved to Florida about 2 years ago from New York. So when he was 14, his family moved down. And as a result, he was fairly new to diving. So he was getting really pumped up about his first trip out to a shipwreck. It would be his first time seeing one in person. And, you know, as a kid, like, that's the stuff dreams are made of. That's like a Scooby-Doo adventure. Well, Scooby-Doo probably wasn't around, but yeah, back then. But it's like a mystical adventure when you're younger. It would be, if I had a chance to do that when I was that age, I would have jumped on that shit. It would have been amazing. Feel like fucking Goonies.
Yeah, you'd have to kill me not to be able to stop me from diving in a sunken ship site. That's fucking awesome.
Yeah. So they had checked the weather before they left. The newspaper weather report had indicated it was going to be a nice day. When they left, there wasn't a cloud in the sky. The just a slight breeze. The sun was out. It was in the mid 50s. So, you know, a little cold to be going swimming, but they figured if they were keeping active and swimming hard, that they'd be fine. And they brought this big 7-foot Air Force raft with them. So like one of those, like they're rectangular and the 4 sides are inflatable with kind of a flexible bottom. One of those guys. And with them, they brought everything they would need for this trip. They brought their diving masks, their snorkels, a drift anchor, a spear gun, a set of oars. They also, attached to the inside of the raft was this waterproof pack. So it was like actually attached to the raft, and they put like provisions like snacks and their smokes and a lighter and all that stuff in there. So they started out there. It was, I think, like a 15-minute drive from where the boys lived. They started out into the water. Brian recalls that it was very cold when they got in, and it was kind of like one of those things where they jumped in and they jumped back out like, oh fuck, I don't know if I want to do this, and then they ultimately decided they were going to get back in and head out. So during the 2-mile trek towards the sunken ship, the boys would take turns manning the oars so that none of them would get too tired before they had reached the destination. At one point, Larry and Warren were paddling the raft, and Larry noticed that they seemed to be drifting off course without really moving further out to sea. When they had first started, the sunken ship would have been off to their right, but as they were paddling, they now noticed that the ship was off to their left, so they were drifting. And Warren began to complain that the water was getting rough and was fighting against the paddles, which was leaving his arms sore. And he asked if someone would switch with him. And it was at this point that the rest of the boys noticed that the waters were starting to become choppy, with small whitecaps kicking up around the raft. With the sudden change in the water, the boys started to notice that clouds were starting to roll in and cover up the sun, and the wind, which when they left had been a slight breeze, was now starting to pick up. They looked back to where the shoreline was. And at this point, the shoreline was just a distant sliver of green, so they could barely see it in the distance. And they seemed to be going further and further out to sea and away from the land, and it looked like they were going off course from where their destination was, which was the shipwreck. And the waves were pushing them out into the bay channel, which would then lead them right out into the open sea. So, seeing that the weather's turning, combined with the fact that they were being pushed toward the channel, the boys tried to get back to the shore. So Eric, Warren, and Brian all jumped into the water to try to push the raft. So they got behind it, grabbed the raft, started kicking their legs, while Larry and Brad took the oars and were trying to paddle against the waves. Even with the added effort of the boys in the water, the tide was too strong, and they started to exhaust themselves. So as a result, all of the boys started climbing back into the boat, and they kind of were just sitting there trying to figure out what to do next. They were still drifting. They didn't have a way to fight against the current, and the waves were pushing them closer and closer to the channel. And the sky was getting darker and the winds were getting stronger, and the boys started to notice boats coming back in from the open water heading back towards the port. And they ended up seeing this small boat entering the channel, and they tried to call towards them for help. And they were yelling and waving, and they said they saw an older woman on the boat, and she turned, but it seemed like she couldn't understand what they were saying, so she just waved back at them and continued on their way.
God.
Yeah. And I don't know if it was because she had a motor on the boat or what the deal was, but she just kind of waved at him, kept going on. So Brad ends up grabbing a spear gun that they had, and he tied a red shirt to it, and he aimed it towards the boat. And he in a last attempt to get them to turn around and notice that they weren't messing around, they needed help, they fired it, and it fell a little short of the boat. And either the woman didn't notice that, or she ignored it and continued heading towards the mainland while they were drifting further out. So after this happened, this was the last boat that they saw. They didn't see any other boats on the water, so they started to panic as the raft was pulled further and further into the channel until they started to notice this buoy in the distance. So they came up with this plan that they were going to try to use the drag anchor from their raft to attach to the side of the buoy as they went by. And they were thinking that if they could attach themselves to the buoy, then they'd be able to tie up the raft and wait until the weather became more favorable and then head back in. But as they were getting closer to the buoy, the waves began rising higher and higher, and the raft started to fill with water. So the boys were trying to get the water out of the raft, but the water was becoming more and more turbulent, and the waves were smashing against the raft, and it was smashing up against the base of this huge buoy. And when it hit the buoy and came back down, it was creating this like suction. So anything that got close to that would be hit by the wave and then sucked underneath the buoy.
Jeez.
And then propelled out the other side. So as the boys at this point, they don't have any way to avoid this thing. So they all made the decision to jump out of the raft before the raft was sucked under the buoy. So all five of them jump out. The raft gets sucked under, pops up on the other side. And it's upside down at this point. One of the boys notices it, and they all swim back over, flip the raft upright, and climb back inside. Once they get inside, a cold rain starts coming down. And again, remember, it's early spring, and so it's not super hot yet. It's nicer than it is up here at that time for sure, but it was a cold rain, and the sky became dark and a storm started up. and the waves and the current and the wind and everything pushed them past the buoy. They weren't able to hook on to it and stay there. But just as they were leaving the channel, they were pulled past the USS Massachusetts, which was the shipwreck they had been heading towards to begin with. Now, just a quick little aside about the USS Massachusetts and why it's there and what the deal with that is. So the USS Massachusetts was one of 3 battleships that was commissioned by Congress in 1890. So it's really fucking old. And the ship itself was instrumental in the U.S. victory during the Spanish-American War. But historians have labeled the ship the worst battleship that was ever made. During the time it was active, the ship ran into many different issues and got into accidents, which required extensive and expensive repairs and upgrades to the ships and its equipment and its weapons. Due to the issues in repairing it, the ship ended up getting decommissioned, and then it was recommissioned. And then in 1910, the Secretary of the Navy declared the Massachusetts to be worthless and obsolete, and he retired it a second time. After the second retirement, the Massachusetts was stripped of its weapons and was refitted to act as a cruise ship for sailors, and was also used to attend the coronation of King George in England in 1911. After its career as a cruise ship, the Massachusetts was again recommissioned, but this time as a target practice ship for the U.S. Navy, before it was finally retired in 1919. And then in 1920, it was brought down to Pensacola, Florida, where it sat in about 30 feet of water off the coast of the Pensacola Naval Air Station. And again, it was used for target practice, but this time it was a stationary target. And eventually it sank due to all the damage it had received. But during low tide, the turrets and the wheelhouse are still able to be seen above the waves. So it's not fully sunk, because I think when it sunk, it landed on a sandbar. So like all around it is deeper, but where it is, it's like 30 feet of water. So a lot of it's still sticking up out of the water.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And now huge parts of it are an artificial reef. So it would make sense that you'd want to go diving down there. There's Goliath groupers, stingrays, several different species of sharks, as well as dolphins that show up in the area. So it's, it would make sense that that would be their destination, especially given that the weather on the day they left was supposed to be nice from what they were saying. But on this day, it was not the case, apparently. So they see the ship and they're fast approaching it. The storm picks up and they see the wheelhouse sticking up out of the waves. And the storm is pushing them past this. And so keep in mind, this shipwreck is 2 miles from shore, and they're getting pushed past it now. Brian said the wind was howling through the window. Like he said he remembered the sound of the wind from the storm blowing through the broken windows of the wheelhouse, and it was creating this whistling sound. That was kind of like he said it almost sounded like a scream as they were being pushed past the boat. But they ended up passing the shipwreck and they drifted, getting caught in the storm. And then almost as suddenly as it started, the rain started to become a mist and the waters became calm and still and everything was perfectly silent. And they said not even the sound of a distant seagull could be heard. And with the sudden stillness and silence, Brad started freaking out, thinking that they had died in the storm and where they were now was the afterlife, so to speak. So the other boys had to calm him down and eventually they were able to get them to relax, and they started discussing what their next move would be. And they were looking around, but they couldn't really see anything because everything was blanketed in this fog, and they couldn't see more than 20 to 25 feet in front of them. So they were kind of at a loss with what to do. Luckily, well, I guess luckily, they a lot of their belongings had been stowed in that waterproof pack that's on the side of the raft. And to pass time, they decided to start smoking cigarettes because they had them in there. So they're passing around smokes, and their lighter was in there as well, so it still worked. And they decided to wait until the fog subsided, and then they would find their way back to shore, because right now, whether they were drifting or what, that they couldn't see anything. So even if they started pushing off, they wouldn't know if they were going further out to sea or closer. They had no way of knowing. So they decided to just wait until the fog subsided. And as they were talking, they started to notice that the water that they were in was unusually warm. And it was so warm that it would have been even a surprise during the hottest summer months to have been that warm. But this was still early spring, so it should have been pretty chilly. And while they were kind of reacting to this strangeness, they started to hear a sound in the distance. And all the boys quieted down, were straining their ears, thinking maybe it was the sound of an approaching ship or a boat. They heard like this kind of sloshing, splashing sound. And then out of nowhere, they were hit with the smell of rotting fish. And shortly after smelling that, there was a huge splash nearby. And it was, whatever created it was big enough that it caused a wave that was large enough to go over the side of the raft and put water into the bottom of their raft.
Whoa.
And they're looking around. They can't see anything. It's, they can't see more than 20 feet in front of them. It's all fog. And then a few moments later, they hear another huge splash, but this time they see a shape in the fog. And at first, it was thought that what they were seeing was a utility pole that was bobbing out of the water. It was about 10 feet tall, and at first, when they could just see the silhouette in the mist, at first it looked like it had like a bulb on top of its head, but it was standing straight up out of the water about 10 feet. And then it bent down and dove back into the water. And once it dove in, silence returned. And they didn't hear anything else. So they were left kind of debating amongst themselves what it could have been. Somebody thought maybe it was an oarfish. And oarfish, for anyone that doesn't know, is essentially it's a sea serpent. They're super long, but it's just like this really long fish that has these fins all the way down its side, and they don't stand upright, so that couldn't have been it. And they kind of come to the consensus that this was a sea monster or a sea serpent. And as they were having this debate, all of a sudden they get silenced by this sudden high-pitched whine that just kind of echoed out of the fog. And Brian said when they heard this, it caused them all to panic, and they decided to ditch their raft, which they had no control over, and try to stay together in a group and swim towards the shipwreck, the direction that they thought the shipwreck was, or the direction they thought land would be. And when they jumped into the water, they noticed that all around their boat were patches of this crusty brown slime floating all over the surface.
Ugh.
And the boys just took off. They attempted to stay together. Brian and Eric were in the front, and the other three were swimming together behind them. And the whole time they were swimming as if their life depended on it. They're still surrounded by this fog. They can't see in front of each other, or they can't see each other through the fog. So they start yelling back and forth to one another, trying to keep track of each other. And as they're swimming, they're also hearing splashing coming from behind them, along with a hissing, whining noise. And they're pushing trying to get through, back towards the ship. And the farther they go, the fog starts to clear. But as the fog starts to clear, the water starts getting choppier and choppier again. The sky gets darker and the rain picks up again. And with all of that, the water, the temperature of the water drops as well. So they're swimming back into the storm, basically. And they're calling back and forth, make sure everyone was accounted for. But before long, there was a sudden scream, and then it was cut short. After that, they hear Warren call out for help, yelling that whatever that thing was got Brad. And then as he's yelling to them, his voice gets cut off. And then Larry comes swimming up behind them out of the fog and joins Eric and Brian. And the three of them start swimming together. And the storm's picking up in strength, and they start to struggle against the waves. And they briefly become separated from Larry and never saw him again. They didn't hear him make a sound. And they even attempted to dive under the water just to see if maybe he was in the area, and they weren't able to see him at all. So they, realizing, they're in a storm now, there's potentially this thing that's eating people. Sitting here probably isn't a good idea, so they keep swimming. And as they're swimming, Eric's leg begins to cramp up, so Brian helps support him while they're swimming in the water. And Brian says that they were swimming for a couple of hours and just kind of getting pushed around by the waves and battered by the storm, and just hoping that they would find the shipwreck or land or something, maybe a ship that would save them. And he said he saw a distant flash of lightning. And with that flash of lightning, he was able to see the silhouette of the Massachusetts, the mast sticking up out of the water. And seeing that kind of renewed his energy, and he, I guess with like adrenaline or hope or whatever, at the seeing potential salvation, both of them just took off with full speed towards the ship, thinking that maybe they could cling to the mast and rest and wait until the storm had passed, and then try to find their way back. But just as they were about to make it to the ship, a wave crashed over the top of both of them, and they both were pulled under the water and separated. And once they came back up, Brian looked around for Eric, and Eric was now in front of Brian, closer to the ship. So Brian starts swimming towards them. There was another flash of lightning, and when the lightning flashed, he saw that this telephone pole thing was sticking out of the water. But he said with the flash of lightning, he was able to see the light reflect off its eyes, and he saw that the thing's mouth was open. And then he watched the thing dive forward with its mouth open, dive right down on top of Eric and pull him under the water.
Oh, shit.
And that was the last he saw of Eric.
Damn. Oh, no.
But after this, Brian has a period of missing time. He has no recollection of swimming past the Massachusetts, which again was 2 miles from shore. But his next memory was that he felt sand under his feet. And upon realizing that he was standing, where he had previously remembered being in the water, he collapsed face first onto the beach and began crawling his way up out of the water and onto land. And in the distance, he was able to see the lights of Pensacola. It was nighttime now. He saw the lights of Pensacola, and he just started walking down the beach. And eventually he found an old military building, and he was able to gain access to the building, and he slept inside until morning. The next thing that he remembered was waking up in the Pensacola Naval Base Hospital, where he found out that their raft had been found by the Coast Guard earlier that morning. And apparently the raft was found 10 miles away from where Brian had washed up on shore. While he was in the hospital, the director of the search and rescue unit, Director E.E. McGovern, came to meet with Brian, and Brian told him his story. And he had asked the director if they found any of his friends, but despite the fact that they had planes and rescue boats out looking for the boys, nothing had been found of them. So the director was asking Brian various questions, and apparently over the course of their interaction, Brian flat out asked the director if he believed his story. And according to Brian, the director replied with, he actually has a quote in his story, and the director says, "You know, son, the sea has a lot of secrets. There are a lot of things we don't know about. People don't believe these things because they're afraid to. Yes, I believe you, but there's not much else I can do." And after that, he asked a few more questions about his story, and then peaced out, and he never saw him again.
Never saw him again.
No. Now, 3 of the 4 boys that went missing that day were never found. There was one boy that washed up on shore a week later. Well, it was a body that washed up on shore a week later. The body had been badly damaged, so cause of death was impossible to tell. But the body was identified as belonging to Brad Rice, who was the youngest of the group.
Yikes! And they couldn't really tell. Like at that point, it's pretty waterlogged and not able to tell if it was actually attacked by anything.
Yeah. And I mean, you know how the ocean works. For one, salt water is going to deteriorate flesh really quick. And for 2, there's going to be scavengers that are going to be picking off of it. And it had been at sea for a week. So it was probably in pretty rough shape. But they were not able to determine the cause of death because of the damage done to the body.
Yikes.
Yeah. So that's his story. So just with his story on the surface, what do you make of that? And I also want to say he was interviewed by several newspapers. He told his story to every one of them, but not a single one mentioned the story of the sea monster. I'm just going to read really quick the write-up from one of them. So the headline is 4 skin divers missing in Gulf. 4 teenage skin divers are missing after abandoning their tide-swept rubber raft in the Gulf of Mexico. A 5th youth swam 2 miles to shore, and got back about dark on Saturday. The 4 missing were Bradford Rice, 14, Warren Felly, 16, Eric Rule, 16, and Larry Stewart Bill, 17. The 5th youth was Brian McCleary, 16, found sleeping on a beach near Fort McRae early Sunday. McCleary said he and the other 4 were skin diving in the Gulf when the tide began carrying them to sea. Swells broke over their raft. He said they tried to moor to a buoy but missed. Then he said they abandoned the raft and decided to swim ashore. The raft washed ashore. Face masks, shoes, and fins were inside. McCleary said he, Bill, and Rule swam together. After a while, both he and Rule developed cramps, and they separated about dark. The youths were from nearby Fort Walton Beach. So that's the entire write-up that was in the paper, and the other reports were similar to that. And so there was no mention of the freak storm. There was no mention of the sea monster. And there is an actual news report from that day, says it was around 58 degrees. The winds that day were 8.6 miles per hour. Visibility was 5 miles. So like super clear day. Total precipitation that day, 0.0 inches.
Wow. Yeah, there's a couple things in that write-up and the information that you just gave that throw a wrench in the story. Before, it sounds like one of these stories from any 70s cryptozoology book. You know, it to me, it sounds like, it reminds me of the Dinganeck story. That thing attacked and tried to land on a boat, and people were injured and stuff like that. Not killed, but injured. But it just sounds like one of these possibly true stories. But the first thing that caught my ear is that short write-up mentions that their masks and flippers were found on the boat.
Right.
So how were they skin diving without their masks and their flippers?
Well, he said that they had gone back in the boat, and then in a panic, they jumped back out. of the boat when they heard the screaming noise.
Oh, okay. Why not mention the creature in any other interview? That's really weird to me.
Because it's unbelievable. Who's gonna believe that story? But it is. So the other thing is, there was never any like criminal charges or anything brought up against him. So it's not like he was on trial for murder or anything.
That was my next question. Was, any charges brought up or any suspicion around this case brought up? I mean, that's the only thing that I can think of to where you would drop the sea monster part, is if a lawyer told you to.
Yeah. If you, in case you need to plead insanity, let's go with the sea monster story.
Yeah, no kidding. Or was there some type of fluke storm and everybody just drowned and it's unfortunate? Just go with that.
Or let's get weird with it. It was a freak storm, but what it wasn't an actual storm. It was like the barrier between two different maybe times or dimensions, perhaps. And maybe that's why when they were yelling to the woman in the boat, to her, it just looked like they were floating on regular water. So she's like, hi, hello. And they're like, what are you doing? No, we're in the storm. And she's like, there's no storm. It's perfectly clear. Hi. And then because like what it could have been was they go through this barrier, which is like the storm, and as they get closer and closer to where the breach is, the storm gets worse and worse. And they get through the breach and then poof, it's all fog and everything's all calm. And maybe they got pulled through like this weird time thing and they ended up somewhere back in like the Cretaceous period or something. And I don't know exactly what Florida would have been like back then, but I know the world in general was warmer and more humid. So that would account for the water warming up. Like there's details in the story that just seem very strange to add if you're going to tell a monster story,
Right.
Like the fact that the sea was warm underneath them when it had been cold previously. The fact that he's describing the storm when it would be very obvious to everybody who was around that there was no storm that day. Like that's not something you can just lie about and have people like, oh yeah, I believe him, even though I live here and there was no storm that day, but okay, I'll believe it. That just seems weird to make these details up when you could just say we got caught and like an undertow got pulled out to sea and were attacked by a sea monster out to sea. You don't need to add all the weird details about how the ocean got warm. That to me, that's like the weirdest detail out of all of them is the warm ocean.
Yeah, and like weirder things happen in the ocean. There's little tiny micro storms and weird shit like that happen. And to me, it's just weird to add the sea monster at all. Why would you add that? I mean, 4 people lost their lives. He survived. You better have a good reason of why you're the only one survived. I figure anybody would be questioned about what the fuck happened in that situation. And if there's 4 people gone, I think saying a fluke violent storm burst or something like that hit us and fucked our shit up and they didn't make it is enough. I mean, I think that's enough to cover some 16-year-old kid. Why add the sea monster?
Right. And there's some skeptics that are like, well, maybe he was schizophrenic, but the entire rest of his life, he didn't display any sort of schizophrenic tendencies. So it wouldn't make sense to have the sea monster thing. And then the skeptics are also speculating that he killed his friends and came up with this story in case he needed to plead insanity. He's got this story of a sea monster that took them all out. But again, with the weird details. But I mean, I guess if he was going to plead insanity, saying that there was a storm when there was no storm would be a decent way to start, I guess. But I don't know. It's weird. It's a weird story, and it freaks me out, man. Because just really think about it. Like you're going through this storm, you're freaking out, and all of a sudden everything's calm and placid, and you're just surrounded by fog everywhere. And then slowly out of the fog comes this fucking long neck with a head that then dives underwater. And then you hear the screaming noise.
Yeah, that's a little bit more than unnerving to hear some type of screaming sound while that's going on.
Yeah, I'd be thinking of the screaming eels from Princess
Bride. Yeah,
scare the hell out of me.
Yeah, I mean, if he's going to use that as a defense of insanity later, you think he would keep that part of the story going?
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's the thing, and he, like I said, he never displayed any sort of schizophrenic tendencies. And 3 years after the incident took place, he started corresponding with Tim Dinsdale, who was a Loch Ness Monster researcher, and he started writing letters into Fate magazine. And Fate magazine was where his story was originally published. Cool. I mean, I'm not familiar with how Fate magazine, like I've never read one. But after he tells his story, Fate magazine did put a little caveat in there saying both the Pensacola Journal and Playground News of Fort Walton carried stories of this tragedy. These stories do not match Brian McCleary's account or what the doctors at the naval base reported. One report says that Brian drifted and swam more than 2 miles, but Coast Guard and Navy rescue units estimate he swam at least 5 miles. Doctors at the naval base also said based on the condition he was in, he would have been in the water for over 12 hours. The interviewing reporters specifically told Brian that their stories would not mention the sea serpent, as it was better left unmentioned for all concerned.
Huh. So he was somewhat influenced to drop the sea serpent part.
It sounds to me like they just told him flat out, like, okay, we're going to tell part of your story, but the fancy stuff is staying out.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, what does that mean to you? I think that this very well could have happened then.
I don't know. I really don't know. The fact that the Navy base was able to corroborate part of it and say that he swam for over 5 miles and that he was in the water for 12 hours is pretty interesting. Because if you're trying to, like, I don't think if you're murdering someone and then going back to land, you're going to willingly stay in the ocean for 12 hours. Like, that's a long time to be in the water.
Yeah, is a 16-year-old kid really swimming 5 miles during a storm?
Yeah, apparently that's what happened, though. But he said he has no memory of it. So it's kind of weird he lost time a bit there.
What do you think about the possibility of this creature creating this weather anomaly?
That was another thing. It made me think of like an SCP sort of thing. Like it's this traveling storm, and in the center of this storm is a monster, and the storm is there to like create shipwrecks so that the monster can eat. And after it wrecks the ship, it moves so that the center of it is all calm, and then the monster comes out and eats them. And that's like he creates this thing, and the weather anomaly surrounds him, and he's like the epicenter of it. The only thing that kind of doesn't fit that is the fact that it was able to leave the calm waters, the calm area, and come out. So that makes me think like maybe it was like a breach of some sort, and like they were able to cross through into wherever it was, and likewise it was able to cross through to wherever they were. You know, it used the same opening to chase them, and they probably, as they were swimming away, it was chasing them down and got, left its area. And who knows, maybe it was never able to find its way back, and it's just somewhere in the ocean now,
swimming around attacking kids.
Just swimming around, yeah. Or maybe it's dead. I don't know how old those things grow to be. This was like what, 60 years ago now.
I think it'd still be kicking around.
You think so? You think dinosaurs lead a long life?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just based on the description, there's actual drawing that he did of the creature. Did you see that?
Yeah, it just looks like your standard sea serpent, long neck sticking out of the water with a head.
Yeah, or your average Nessie head popping out of the water.
Right. Yeah.
So we could be dealing with a couple of things there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Maybe it was a plesiosaur, and they got pulled back to the Cretaceous, and this thing followed them out of the Cretaceous back into the present, and then died in the ocean.
That's crazy. There's just some weird type of half in the air and half in the water portal that their little boat went through. And for like 20 feet, they were in the Cretaceous period.
Yeah.
And it chased them right out of the other end of the portal.
And it chased him out. Get out of my period, you sons of bitches.
And he slipped through.
Yeah. He came through chasing him off his lawn and ended up getting lost.
I mean, it might be a stretch here, but I mean, if this kid's having his story changed, and I know that there's a report in the Old Farmer's Almanac about the weather that day, do you think there's any chance of some type of cover-up going on?
I don't really think so. There's no real motive to it. There was never any criminal charges brought against him, and he stood by his story his whole life until he passed away in 2016, I think. So, but his entire life he stuck by that story.
Wow. And I mean, did he bring back the sea serpent aspect of the story later in life?
Yeah, that was always, like, he never shied away from that. That was always the story.
Okay, yeah. So it was just who was reporting on it that omitted the sea serpent
right,
part.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Because when he wrote to Fate magazine, he was telling his story. That's what he was doing, and he stood by that until the day he died.
That's very interesting, dude. We might have an actual attack by a sea monster. The article you sent me, we were talking before we started recording, was rather cynical and humorous, and it was hard to differentiate their humor from what this story was.
Yeah, well, I mean, they were taking like the Joe Nickel approach, and we're trying to look at it like what could have possibly happened, and I mean, really, when you're looking at the face of it, and especially if criminal charges have been brought up, it's easy to see, or easy to say that this could have been a murder, and he, killed his friends and then swam back to shore. But it just seems, it seems dangerous, the way that he would have gone about it, because he ditched the raft completely and then swam the 2 or 5 miles either way back to shore when he was admittedly pretty new to diving.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. He's admittedly new to the area and being, diving in the ocean.
So with this, I mean, sure, if you want to take the skeptical route, it's easy to say that this was a made up story that he came up with in case he was being questioned for murder. But I think maybe there's something paranormal about it.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something strange about it. I like the fact that he stuck to his story, and yeah, I don't know. That's a fucking weird one. Just imagine that.
Yeah, it's very scary, and I don't like it at all. And just to me, it's always the thing that's always haunted me was the fact that it's completely silent and calm, and they saw the silhouette in the fog before it dove down into the water, and then they were just getting picked off one by one, and all they could hear was the hissing and splashing.
Oh God!
And it creeps me right out, man.
Stay out of the ocean, man.
Yeah.
Unless you got that cool boat that will suck all the water away from the bottom.
Yeah, if you've got a cool sucky boat, then go nuts. Just stay within the dry areas that it can push away, and pretend like you're Moses. Like, you wave your staff around, you could have your friends run across the ocean, tempt your enemies to follow you, and then you jump out of the way and let the ocean smash down on them and laugh as they drown.
And then summon this creature to eat them.
Yeah, it's the Moses way.
Thank you for listening to the Whatcast. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, iTunes, and YouTube. Enjoy the podcast. Get yourself a Whatcast t-shirt or a sticker pack. Who was that dude on that one episode? Try the links in Homie's page. All this and more can be found at www.thewhatcasters.com. Thanks again for listening and have a great week.